she left her home country as a teenager and lived and worked in England, Holland, and France before moving to the United States. She experienced a spontaneous kundalini rising experience in 1992 while living in Los Angeles. After years of contemplation of the phenomenon of kundalini and spiritual enlightenment, she became a spiritual teacher. Her book about the experience was published May 3rd, 2018. Please join me in welcoming Monique Rebelle.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
I'm very excited. I'm very excited because it's such a nice turnout. I live in Reno, Nevada, and even when I do events in Reno, not as many people show up. So, and my book was just published last May, so I don't have a great following, and this is really nice. Thank you so much. I hope that I'm going to fulfill your dreams about what could it be like, a description of experience that I had, and so nice that you are all interested in this. As Chris already said, this was something that happened to me spontaneously, and I didn't know anything about that experience before. I didn't know the word kundalini at all, and I didn't even believe in chakras. I heard the word, but I thought, that's just something that people who believe in whatever they believe in, right? So that was my attitude beforehand. That doesn't mean that I didn't have some unexplainable experiences that were very, very interesting, and I couldn't figure them out at all before the main Kundalini rising experience happened. I'm going to start with a little experience that happened to me when I was 16 and I was still living in Poland. Can you all hear me well? Good. I was still living in Poland. I was 16. When I was 14, I decided that I was going to be a painter. I wanted to be an artist. My parents were actors, but because of strange family situation, I wasn't allowed to pursue acting. So I decided, okay, I'm going to be a painter, and got very interested in visual arts. Started to learn about history of art, and at some point I became interested in history or philosophy. So one day I went to the library in Warsaw. I lived in the center of town. It's a big city, about 2 million people, maybe 1.5 million. At the time when I lived there, that was in 1973 when that event happened. I went to the library, and I had no idea where to start, what to look for, but I wanted to get a book that would talk about the beginning of philosophical thought. And the librarian helped me with a book. Actually, he brought me 2 books, 2 huge volumes of Indian philosophy. So I grabbed the first volume and I started reading, and it wasn't easy because I didn't know, there were a lot of words I didn't understand, and I was 16, still in high school, and well, I was going through it little by little, but what really interested me were the pictures, and then there were verses. There were verses of Vedas. And I started reading, and immediately I just started to absorb it really quickly. I didn't know why, But at some point, I read a verse about Atman uniting with Brahman. I didn't know what Atman was and what Brahman was, but there was an explanation that individual soul is Atman, and the one that's immovable but moves, but makes everything move, that's the Brahman, the totality of all. And somehow, I read it again, and something happened to me. I suddenly felt this surge of energy slowly, almost exploding inside of me. It was a quiet library, of course, and I suddenly felt so charged with energy and joy, the joy of suddenly getting it. I got it. Yes, that's what it is. The individual soul connects with everything. That was the first time ever I read anything about Vedas. I didn't know. I had no experience with it before whatsoever. But at that moment in that library, the energy was so strong that I had to get up and I had to start moving. I couldn't stay still. I put the books away and I run out of the library. The library was on the second floor, and I was running so fast that I felt I was flying down the stairs. And as I was in that flight, I was able to hold on to the rail on the left, and at the same time I looked at the wall on the right of that staircase, and I was flying so fast, but I could see the wall moving in front of my eyes in slow motion. And I couldn't understand that at all, but that's what it was. I could see little details on that wall, little scratches, little paint coming through, the layers of paint, and I was thinking, this is not possible. I'm going so fast down. How can I see it at the same time in slow motion? Well, then I ended up down at the bottom of the stairs, and I opened the door. The street was bright, and the city was very busy. It was during midday, and I was wondering, what am I going to do now? The energy was still inside of me, and I thought, well, where am I going? What am I doing? But then I saw that my feet were moving themselves. They were just walking. And I was just there flying together. They were not touching, I was not touching the ground. I was just hovering over, going towards the intersection, all scared because thinking, well, I can't stop myself. I don't know, I'm just moving. And an intersection is coming on, and there is a lot of cars. I'm going to get a deadly accident. But as I got to the end of the sidewalk, my feet just stopped gently. And after the green light went on, I walked to the other side of the street. And as I was getting to the end of the other side of the street, I noticed that I'm not so weightless anymore. I slowly started to go down, and that was strange. I felt clumsy. I suddenly was back heavy on the ground and walking like this, thinking, oh, this is not so much fun. It was much better to be almost flying. So everything came back to normal, and I had no one to tell this about, because I knew that anyone I would tell this about would think that I'm simply crazy. So all I did while I was flying down those stairs, I said to myself, remember this, just so I had it in my mind and remembered it. So that's one story that yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
It's okay.
But I missed the very, very beginning of your lecture.
Mhm.
The part before the books going, what started this for you?
I just explained that the spontaneous experience of Kundalini rising happened to me without me knowing anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't mean that that some peculiar experiences didn't happen beforehand. I just didn't have explanation for them, so I described one of them.
Okay.
That happened years before. That happened when I was 16. That event in the library, and then my full experience happened when I was 35. So years later, and in the meantime, I didn't look for the source of that experience. I just remembered it, but for some reason I just let it be. I just left it as it was with the memory of it, but I didn't try to explain it. I didn't try to search for reasons why it would have happened. And I learned later, after the full Kundalini rising, what actually happened at that time. So going back to the actual experience that happened, because what I'm thinking that that's probably what you would be most interested in. Some of you already are reading my book, maybe some of you already read it. So the description of the experience may be something that's probably most alive. And tomorrow there will be a workshop which will explain much more about the whole subtle body and my interpretation of it because of the experience that I had. So, as I said, I maybe considered myself a spiritual person, but only in terms of having some insights, dreams that I could interpret in a way that was symbolic to me. But generally, I never had any inclination to have a spiritual teacher or learn more about spirituality altogether. I grew up in a Catholic country. My parents were atheists, so I didn't have much in common with the religious group, a large, huge religious group in Poland, Catholic group. But of course, growing up there in the Catholic country, you have the figure of Jesus Christ, and it was always puzzling me, why would one want to like give the other cheek when someone hits you on one cheek? Like why to do that? I didn't have explanations for a lot of things that had to do with religion or spirituality, but I had. My artwork was already in some way something that was a search, which I didn't call spiritual, but it was. So a lot of things that I did before the experience happened, I did subconsciously. I was subconsciously working on my artwork as much as I could, with as much passion as I felt, and I put everything else aside as nothing else mattered, so I could just focus on that. And that was what I believed in. I believed in myself, and I believed that art is going to give me answers. The answers were to my questions about what am I supposed to do with my life? Why, and how, and all these questions that I'm sure if you're here, you also ask yourself, right? Or you had asked yourself when you were younger, and you may still be asking yourself. So I was in my teens when I decided to be an artist, and then I left Poland when I was 18, not knowing anything about anything. I just left to London, and life started, and life started in the sense of me being completely independent and completely on my own. I didn't have anybody supervising me, so I was there just getting through life. And then I got pregnant. I had my daughter, who was born in Poland. My relationship with her father didn't work out, but I kept on painting. I moved to, from London, I moved to Amsterdam. I wanted to live with my daughter, but due to circumstances that I describe quite briefly in my book, I wasn't able to be with my daughter. So little by little, years went by, and I kept on working on my art. I had shows. I was an accomplished artist, I have to say. I had shows, but I couldn't really live from it very well. It was very hard to live, to survive from my artwork. So I tried different things. I tried design, I tried fashion, I tried to work in bars, I did all kinds of things. Eventually, I ended up in United States, in Los Angeles. And this is when the second amazing experience happened to me that changed the way I was looking at my art, and changed the way I was working on my art. So I'm going to describe this little situation that happened. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I first came to Los Angeles. I got there in 1987, and for about a year I was trying to figure out whether I should keep on painting, whether I should actually try acting, because I was always very drawn to it. So little by little, I started to, instead of painting, because I didn't have a studio, I started to write titles of poems. After a while, I had about 40 titles, I think, of different poems that I wanted to either put in a form of an actual poem or make a painting out of it. And one day, I got my studio. Finally, I got my studio downtown, between downtown and Hollywood in Los Angeles. And I started painting. At first, I was painting those little titles of poems. And it was fun because I could pick out a title that I came up with some month ago and go, oh, okay, how would that look like? What is that? What could that be like? And finally, I had maybe about 7 or 8 of those little acrylic paintings. When I saw one of the titles said, Understanding Understatement. So it was a play on words and kind of, puzzling to me, and I thought, okay, let's try that. So I began with, maybe I can even draw this since we have these things. It's very simple. I began with straight line as something that means a thought. To me, it meant a thought, a decisive thought that goes straight. And then there were other thoughts that were going like this, and maybe like that, and like this, and they're all kind of straight, and so on. And I thought, oh, these are thoughts, so this would be like, these thoughts, it's understanding. That's symbolic to me. That's what I thought of. And then I did a little shading on the side, here and there, and here, and I just did the little shading and in the corners, and that shading was an emotional context of these decisions, these thoughts. So I was just into it, painting it, and putting different colors, and just simply creating my painting, when suddenly, while I was really focused and looking at that painting, something incredible happened. The painting outgrew everything that I knew. I don't know if it's something, if I'm saying it the way that you can get, but something happened that suddenly all the knowledge that I had about art and from the times when I started painting, all that I knew, all that I've learned, disappeared in the much bigger picture. And that picture was of maybe this kind of imagery, but somehow it just outgrew my painting and everything I knew about art altogether. And I found myself in a different space. And it was abstract space. And I realized that that exhilarating, incredible sphere, is giving me all this information that I just never thought I would get. It was not specific information, but it was just like you just get a download of something that makes you feel so good. It was so bright. It was so exhilarating. It was just the space that I got it. Yes, this is the space of concepts. These concepts are alive, and they are there all the time, and they are creating the rest of it. So the concepts are actually becoming reality, but the stage that I saw at that moment was still a conceptual stage of, you name it, life, experience, truth, whatever you think it could be. But this was a huge breakthrough for me, and very hard to explain to anyone else. And since then, I started to work on that kind of work. I started to work abstract. And as I was focusing on my painting, even though these things would happen to me before when I was painting, when I was working on these abstract paintings, which I did for about 3.5 years, kind of non-stop, sometimes I would feel that, first of all, I suddenly would go back to the image from my past, memory from my past, like an image when I was a little kid, and I felt something. I felt a deep emotion at that time. And that emotion stayed in me, but I didn't know. Suddenly, I would feel it again, and I would feel that emotion moving through the brush onto the painting. And as that would happen, I'd find myself again in that abstract, exhilarating space. So I kept on working. I kept on working, and I worked nonstop. I lived in an attic where I had no water, no running water. There was bathroom downstairs. I had no kitchen. I mean, my conditions were really difficult, but I didn't care. I just worked on my artwork, and that's all I did. But at the same time, I wanted to be with my daughter, and I couldn't. And one of the main reasons for that was not only that it was a difficult family situation with my mother and my difficult relationship with my mother, who kept my daughter and made her not want to come with me when I came to get her, which I didn't expect, so I was all in shock for quite a while after that. So I also just was barely surviving. I lived on cans of tuna fish and oatmeal for months. And eventually, I started to get depressed because I knew that, well, my friends, artist friends, I got to know more people, but I just started to get depressed. Felt like I have no way out. It was, I believed in my work, but the world didn't believe in my work. I just had no way I couldn't keep on going. So eventually I started to, I didn't want to get out of bed, and that took a few good months, maybe 4 or 5 months, until one day I knew that the promise I made to myself when I was leaving Poland to spend 13 years, I gave myself 13 years to establish myself as an artist and be happy with my career and be able to have my child with me. That was my goal, and 13 years came, and I didn't realize my goal. I failed. I knew I failed, and as that realization hit me, I started to feel hate towards myself. I started to hate myself so much for failing, for not making the promise to myself, and I couldn't keep it. So there was a show I had of my artwork, and I still had big hopes that something would sell, No, nothing sold. And as that show ended and nothing sold, it was the 10th of March, 1992, I woke up and I knew that there is something I have to do, and I have to commit suicide. There is just no way. I just have to do it. My mind couldn't figure out the way out. At the same time, I was still trying to save myself from it, right? So there was this fight in me the whole morning, and I was trying to figure out how not to commit suicide, but I couldn't. The answer was clear. You failed. You're no good. You can't live anymore. You failed. You failed everything. You failed yourself, and that's the worst. That's it. It's the end. It's the end. So I was going to go to the store and get razor blades. And as I was leaving my attic and going down the stairs, I realized the bathroom was on the ground floor, and I said to myself, shower. I need to take a shower. That will soothe me. Maybe that will help me. That might put away that violent desire that I had it was violent to kill myself, not just to hurt myself, but to end my life. So it was an old-fashioned bathroom with a glass wall, and the whole house was built in 1880s. It was on tour of LA, actually. It was a beautiful home in total disrepair. My landlady didn't have enough money to really keep it up, but it was beautiful, and my attic where I lived was very nice, only a lot of dust, so I had allergies all the time. But I entered that bathroom. I decided to try to take a shower, and I just collapsed in the tub. And that's when the thing started. It started with me, and this is what, with me trying to help myself. I had this urge to get up and run to that store for those razor blades, and I was trying to figure out how to stop myself from doing that. So what I did something that I did for years anyway, while painting and not feeling good and being either depressed or being sad or having the problems that I did have with my mother and not being able to be with my daughter or not surviving well as an artist. So I had that one idea that I did use in my work before. In order to paint, I was able to put away that emotion, of that negative emotion that I felt, and just keep on painting. And here, the emotion was so strong that I had to really focus to find out, what is it? And I called it depression, although it could be called something else. For me, that name, giving it a name, gave it an entity that I could deal with. I could feel that I'm in it, and right when I felt what it was, I felt it with my whole being, that pain. I faced it, I confronted it completely. I felt it, and as I felt that pain, I made this decision with my mind to step out of it and to leave it there. I knew I couldn't deny it because it was there. I couldn't push it away because it would come back to me stronger. So all I could do was to step out of it. The time where I could be away from it lasted seconds. But something very interesting happened. When I stepped out of that emotion, I couldn't imagine anything positive at that time. I mean, I was suicidal, so there was any good thought in my mind. Nothing positive could come up. But I was able to push away that depressive, horrible, dark thought that was going to kill me. I was able to stay away from it for a moment, for a few seconds, and as I was experiencing that, I felt emptiness. A true state of neutral, not emotional state. And it was very particular. It was not something that I felt before with such precision. It was an actual state of emptiness. It felt a little bit like a vacuum. It wasn't totally comfortable, but it was there. And as I was in that state of emptiness, I focused on breathing. Just intuitively, I started to focus on breathing. And I knew that's all there is. All there is me breathing. After a while, the emotion would come back, and I would do the same thing. I step out of it. Make my mind guarded, guard me from that emotion coming back. Just keep there and breathe. And I kept on repeating that for as long as I could. And finally, I noticed that I am in that state of emptiness. There was no emotion in me, but my mind kept on going. And my mind kept on going and going and going and explaining to me, no, you do have to kill yourself. Yeah, you do. Right. There is no way out of this because this and this and that, you failed, and you can't get through this. There is no other answer. So I'd be lying in the bathtub, feeling emotionally completely kind of done. There was no, it didn't bother me anymore, but my mind kept on going and telling me, no, you just have to do it, you have to do it, you have to do it. I tried and tried and tried, and I didn't succeed. I agreed to commit suicide. I agreed that my mind was right. So I was going to do it. I gave up. I mean, I didn't give up willingly. I just simply had to agree that that was the only thing I could do. And I had my eyes closed, and when I opened my eyes after a while, just ready for that next step of getting up and going to that store, that's when I saw something that terrified me. Absolutely terrified me. Right in front of me, on the background of the white tub, there was a tube, like this wide tube of rainbow light, just floating. And it seemed like it was coming out of me. And it was right in front of me. It was beautiful. It was just beautiful, slowly moving rainbow tube of light. And it was real. And so, what do you do when in the reality that we live that has no rainbow tubes of light floating around, you suddenly see it? It's like a science fiction horror movie because it's real, and yet you don't know where it's coming from. So I got so scared that I wanted to jump out of the tub, and I made the first couple of steps to get out of the tub when I realized it's moving with me. So that's when I had to make another decision. I either run out, naked, run out of the bathroom and yell and scream to get my fear out and just freak out, or I conquer my fear and find out what's going on. So I said to myself, no matter what happens, I'm going to watch this. I sat down with my legs crossed, moved my face the other way towards the window, closed my eyes and waited. And that's when the next step, the next stage happened. I didn't know anything about it, but it happened. I started to see pictures of a little child. I didn't know where these images were coming from. There were maybe like little video clips, like tiny little snippets of videos. I saw this little child, and I saw it from, like, I'm standing here, the child would be right here. I saw it from above. I didn't know this child, but then I realized that I can feel its feelings, and I can hear its thoughts. The child was making decisions. After a while, I realized that this child is me. And so I was watching myself making decisions that I remembered some of them very clearly, and some of them I knew that they were true, but I suddenly remembered them for the first time since they happened. So during the next probably 5 minutes, I was experiencing the thoughts that I had as a little child developing into trains of thoughts, and little by little coming closer to the present time. After a while, I noticed that I can follow my thoughts. I can follow each thought from the time when I was little and started thinking. These thoughts, they never disappeared. They were always there, and they continued. They continued in a logical fashion. You know, you make a decision. I made a decision of not hurting my dog when I was a kid, and that decision developed further into a specific stance that I had. So all these decisions that I had were developing, these thoughts were developing, and eventually each of them came to the present time. It's like I compare it to the bubbles of oxygen in water going up. They came to present time, and as each of them came to present time, they vanished. But they vanished together with my full comprehension of them. So it wasn't any there was no moral judgment in it. There was nothing but full understanding of each of those thoughts that I was following, the trains of thoughts. And there were not that many, actually. There were several that had to do with my family, with my future that I thought about, with relationships, with whatever that you can think of in your life. There are these several trains of thoughts that we have. They develop and they come to the present time. And as you get to the present time, they disappear, but their energy stays. It transcends. And so I was watching that happen. I was watching my mind doing this by itself. Eventually, I realized that all my thoughts are gone. And also at the same time, I felt that the shell that I was covered before with this dark shell of like mud thing that suddenly fell off me and just disappeared into nothingness. It just was gone. It fell off, and as it was leaving, it looked more like a dark smoke. And suddenly I was without that bundle of thoughts that we live with on a daily basis, that we think who we are, the person that we think we are, that personality that we carry with us since we are little, that we grow that personality that's connected to everything else in the external world, we have that on us. And as I lost that, it just dropped off me. I was free. So I felt completely free, and together with that came this tremendous joy. And I realized that the mind is able to figure everything out very well. And also I realized pretty much at the moment when that bundle of the ego was falling off, I realized that, no, this is not just me. This is a universal thing. The fact that it happened to me, it means that it can happen to anybody. Because I wasn't anybody special. I was that troubled person who made a lot of mistakes, who felt terribly guilty for doing what I did, who had absolutely no right to any special treatment. No. This is something that I knew can happen to anybody. So I was there knowing that, I can figure everything out. My mind can figure everything out. But by then, there was no need to figure anything more because everything was clear. All my thoughts were gone. I could see or feel new thoughts coming in, and the same thing would happen. I could bring them to the present moment, and they would vanish. And more light was coming in, and I started to feel that there is some kind of whitish light around me, and I started to feel like little speckles of gold all around. A little time went by, and I started to feel that there is someone around me. And that's the next stage, when I started to feel that there is someone around me, and there is a presence there, and that presence is supporting me. I felt supported, and the presence was coming closer, and it felt more and more exciting, and more wonderful, and with a little bit, few more seconds went by, and that presence was closer and closer, and then I felt that it touched my heart. So the moment when it touched my heart, I fell in love, and I knew that the presence fell in love with me too. And it wasn't a love it was a complete love. It was love that did have all of the sensual feeling. There was no physical orgasm, but it was an orgasm of the whole being. Complete. It was a complete love. And I knew that it's real. I knew that it's forever. And there is no doubt about that love. I don't doubt that the presence loved me. I don't doubt it for a second. And I love that same presence just as much. And that presence knows everything about me. It knows every thought. It knows all of my feelings. It knows all of me. It knows everything about me. Completely. And by then, I already knew that this is not just about me. As I found out when my thoughts vanished and the dark shell fell off, I knew that if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone in the same way. Every one of us is loved completely, madly. That's what it is. And then I realized Jesus was teaching that. Buddha was teaching that. They got that. They received that love so they could give it. So they were giving it in their teachings. So they stayed there feeling that love, and more and more being filled up with it, and started to realize so much better how so many of us, we don't know that we're loved. We don't know that each of us is completely loved forever. And we hurt because of that. So I was feeling like I'm giving that love and just being there. And then the next stage started. The next stage, I suddenly hear music. It's beautiful music. I'm thinking, wow, the house is empty. Who could be playing music in the house at 2:30 p.m. on, I don't know what day it was, Wednesday or Tuesday? There's no one in the house. Who's playing music? I was almost ready to jump out and hear who was that, when I realized that the music was around me. And it was the most incredible symphony of sounds, including very low sounds like we have in Buddhist chants, and very high angelic sounds that were way above our human range. And it kept on going, and the space was filling up with blue color. Very intense, going, more intense blue. And I just already, you know, my shell came off, my thoughts, all my thoughts were gone, it was cleared, I was loved, completely loved, and then I'm hearing this music. Imagine, I mean, it was incredible. So, I'm listening to this music and I'm being completely in a trance with that, when I see these figures coming close to me and looking at me and nodding and going, like they were like scrolling down, figures of actual people dressed in kind of robes, and some of them seemed familiar and some of them I couldn't tell who they were. I couldn't hear their names, but they were there, each of them looking at me and then going away, and then the other one came and the other one came. I don't know how many there were, but they came, and it was an acknowledgement that I got from them, as if I was taken in this group. I didn't know who they were. So that lasted for a little while. I felt like they acknowledged my transition or my stay. They knew where I was at. And I was just so grateful that they appeared, and I was in that state of being very humble and very, very grateful for their presence. And then a new stage started. Are you guys following? Is this, yeah? Okay. The new stage, I knew it was on because suddenly the background became much darker, kind of purplish, black, bluish purple, very, very deep. And there were laser-like green lines going into infinity. They were crossing each other, disappearing somewhere there. They were not like my paintings of the abstract stuff, but they were actually like, it was alive. The vision was there. It was clear. I had no idea what it was, but it was there. And I started looking at it, trying to figure it out. And I saw that where the lines were crossing, there were little lights there, little pink and white and yellow lights, and they were pulsating. I looked at that. I still didn't know, but at that time, when my mind was so clear from all the thoughts, I could think very well. I wasn't in any state of being transported somewhere. No, I knew exactly where I was. I was in that bathroom sitting, and it just 10 minutes before I was feeling suicidal, and then the light, the rainbow light came. I knew everything. I was extremely present. And I thought to myself, okay, well, what is that? And then the answer came, that it's the matrix of creation. Okay? Matrix of creation, fine. And what does it mean? It meant that wherever these lines were crossing, the little light, the little pulsating light, is a life, is someone's life being created there, incubating on that matrix of creation. And I looked at it, and it was immense. I mean, the space was endless. And then I came to an idea, wow, so these are individual lives. Is my life there too? And suddenly I was able to just fly over that whole space and find my life too. There it was. I was just one of those little lights there. And I felt moved, right? Because, well, this is your life, right? It's right there, that little light pulsating, that's you, right? I felt like, oh my God. And at the same time, it was like, so that's it? I mean, that's a little bit disappointing. So this is what that's all. I'm designed, on a grid. That's it. But that disappointment didn't last long, because the next stage came up.
Oh, cool.
And suddenly, this is huge. This is huge. This is what many of us might have already read about. But the sequence of it has never been presented before. That's why I wrote the book, because I have never found such exact description of the experience, where transitions from one dimension to another is so clear. So at the time when I realized that our lives are farmed, we're farmed on that grid, in the matrix of creation, at the same time I realized that, okay, so that's my life, And another thing that's created is time. And this is very tricky. So time is created. And as I realized that, you know, because the matrix of creation is created, means someone made it, right? It's there. And I have a friend who also is a very spiritual person who told me that he had the same vision of matrix of creation that looked just like what I described. And yeah.
So this matrix of creation, you started a little while ago about your own thoughts bubbling through and in the moment dissipating.
Yeah.
Is that part of the matrix on your thoughts and your kind of decision tree? That's part of the matrix that goes through creation?
It's a little different because I should probably draw that. If I knew how to find it, I'm gonna. Maybe it's too early to draw it, but actually, what happened? You see, let me just go on and before I go into the further parts of the experience, maybe it's good to explain this, that there is physical reality that is like this. That's the nature of it. It has these dots. Then there is the emotional reality that has the same dots because the emotions are able to actually get what's happening on the physical level. But, okay, I'm gonna get more of these. So, then there is the third thing is the mind, right? And that's still the personal thing. That's still you in your personal world. So, okay, this is like that, has that nature, and I should draw here that the second one is of this nature, of, let's say, pink dots. So, those pink dots of the second nature are perceived through the third. Like that. And also the physical nature is perceived by the mind. Okay? So, the further we go into, this is the fourth, so the fourth will have all of this plus its own, and the fifth also will have all of this that happened before, the lower chakras, and so on. So from the viewpoint of the Shushumna, the channel that the Kundalini energy moves through, if it's all open, you can tell that the first dimension, the first chakra, perceives only itself. It doesn't perceive anything else. It's not emotion. It doesn't have the mind to think what's going on. But the second one has already the emotional reaction to the physical, and the mind has the mental reaction to the emotional and physical. So what happened to me when my thoughts came to the present moment and vanished in transcendence was something that had to do with the individual me. Once you get to the fourth chakra, the fourth dimension where the love is experienced, you don't deal with your own self anymore because you don't have any issues. You don't need to. You don't have that. You don't have a problem. See what I mean? So the problem, if there is any, moves on to those other dimensions, and it's explained from the point of view of those dimensions. But the mind is present all the time. So that third dimension, the third chakra, is present. So it's able to, because I'm able to describe it in a way that you can comprehend it, hopefully. So the mind follows it, but it does not, it follows it, but what happens in those upper dimensions is not of the nature of the mind. It has another nature. Each of these dimensions works on different principles. What we understand about our life mostly is the physical, emotional, and mental. And other things we experience as glimpses. Sometimes we feel love, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we can be moved by great music, other times we don't feel good enough to be even moved by great music. Sometimes and that's the sixth dimension that I was talking about right now, sometimes visual art can touch us, and something visual can really make us understand, and it opens our mind to new experiences, and sometimes not. And so it's just the way the mind works is limited to its own fashion, its logical, linear fashion. The way the upper dimensions work, like me understanding, getting the fact that that's a matrix of creation, is an intuitive understanding, okay? So it's not from the third chakra, it's from the sixth chakra. So is that something, is that, am I explaining it?
Yeah, I guess I had more of a question about the matrix itself.
Okay.
You talked about the threads of thoughts that went through you.
You're right.
Is that part of the threads of the divine matrix?
No.
It isn't.
It isn't. It isn't. It's of a different nature. The thoughts that we have, that come to our minds when we from the time when we remember we've been thinking, and now these thoughts are created in the third dimension, in the third chakra, and that's still individual dimension. When we talk about something like matrix of creation, it's something that's created by the sixth chakra, which I call sixth dimension. The subtle body itself is a creation of the sixth chakra. Sacred symbolism, understanding of them, is the sixth chakra. A lot of different ways of understanding, especially intuition and vision, is the sixth chakra. So maybe I can go back to continuing.
Quick question. So I think you were ending with the creation of time.
That's
So
right.
the matrix itself is, you experienced it out of time.
Yeah, exactly. So the matrix of creation is created in a different dimension where time doesn't exist. But that creates it for us, so we're able to experience it in our physical, emotional, material world. And we create our story that way. Out of this, we create our personal story, your vision of the world, your understanding of life is created with that aspect of time. So there you have it. But all that is there, the matrix of creation, the time, okay, I got it, created. And then, as I was saying, something huge happened. From the inside, this incredible power came on. It was so immense that I have no words for it still. But eventually, that incredible power culminated in the statement. And the statement was, I am. So it's interpreted in different ways. You know, some say that it's God saying that. But from my understanding, this is when the soul self-realizes. So the soul self-realizes at the point of figuring out that it had something to do with creation of that individual life that you live. It actually created it. And it exists beyond time. It's eternal. The soul is eternal. So the soul self-realizes in the sixth chakra, in the sixth dimension, at the time when, at the moment when it knows that it is. I am. And there is nothing to add to it. Absolutely nothing. There is nothing you can add to that statement. It is. Each of us is forever. Consciousness is forever. So as I was staying in that moment of self-realization, that I am an eternal soul that created my own life, all through that, and that was a very good question that you had about the thoughts disappearing and the matrix of creation and all that. Throughout that whole experience, there is one thing that's very important to know, and it's called the process of self-inquiry. I think it was Ramana Maharshi who coined that term, and he talks about that. And in the process of self-inquiry, throughout the whole experience of the kundalini rising, the mind asks questions. And then when the mind loses all its thoughts, it still works and it still asks questions. But those questions are then also connected with the way the other dimensions work. So you're still that one being, one consciousness asking the questions. You can ask them at first from the very logical viewpoint, but then later you keep on asking them from more of the viewpoint of the particular dimension your consciousness is going through or is in at that time, like the love dimension. I got it, okay, Jesus and Buddha and other spiritual masters were teaching that. yeah, that's what it was. Then later, those were the ascended masters that came to me, and okay, they were acknowledging me. There was a group connection, acknowledgement. That's what the fifth chakra is about. In the sixth one, there is strong intuition that gives you answer. You have to ask the question, but the answers, the right question and the right answer comes. That's the process of self-inquiry. So as that, as the soul self-realizes, it knows that it created the little life that I am, you know, that we all are. The life created that for the challenge, for you to transcend, right? For you to understand what's really going on. What is this all about? And the soul gives us those challenges, but it exists there through eons of time, forever. That soul, I asked, where does it get the energy from? I know it exists. It says I am. But where does it get the energy from? That was my question. And there is more to the sixth chakra, but I will maybe not go into all of that right now. The point is that when I ask that question, where does the soul get its energy from? I got the answer. And when I got that answer, I realized that now that we know there is no time, everything happens spontaneously, at once, all the time. So all the phenomena, as we are here, we are happening anew every moment. And it happens through this unfathomable, incredible power of inspiration that we can't imagine. It's inspiration that creates it all. So that was my answer that I got. And as soon as I got that answer, I could not ask any more questions. Suddenly the light came on. And in that state, it was not possible to ask any more questions. There was no possibility of any intellectual thought. Could not do nothing. You unite it with all there is in light. So that's why I make a little distinction between self-realization and spiritual enlightenment, because self-realization to me is the self-realization of the soul, while spiritual enlightenment is when the final meeting with your consciousness, your kundalini unit of consciousness, meets with everything there is by exiting through the top of your head and uniting with everything in full consciousness, where you are the creator. Gods, deities are still in the sixth chakra. Outside in the seventh, when it opens up, you are God. You are the creator. You are the complete co-creator of everything. Individuality is not needed.
So, between lifetime and lifetime, is there a continuity? Is there a movement of the soul?
There is continuity, yes. But yes, there is continuity of soul. The soul doesn't die.
So then the big question is there one of us, or is there
Yeah.
one of us, or is there many of us? And what's the interaction between those two?
The soul is one. Yeah. The soul is one. But its identity is not like your identity as you as human right now. But the power of your soul is always there. It never dies. And whether you experience it or not depends on the state of your consciousness. So you can say, well, everybody is an eternal soul. Well, you are, if you know it. In that sense, not that you know it, that you heard of it, but that you self-realizes. That's why self-realization is so important. That's why it's the most important thing to do, because you realize your immortality. You don't worry about small things like that.
So you're saying that self-realization is a realization of the soul,
Yes.
okay? And enlightenment is the realization that we're all one?
You can say it that way, yes, and yeah. And there are stages in the process of kundalini rising where in the 6th chakra, your soul self-realizes. When we talk about religious understanding of these things, for example, in Hinduism, the soul exists, but in Buddhism, it doesn't. Because in Buddhism, there is, even in the Zen Buddhism, for example, there is an instant understanding of everything at once, and there you are. But in Hinduism, there is soul. And this is my understanding. This is accordingly to my experience. Because these dimensions are working on different principles. So the 7th dimension works on different principle than the 6th. And as we can see and perceive the subtle body, that's in the 6th chakra. In the 6th dimension, we can perceive that. We can't perceive it, unless we are a seer with that 6th chakra open up all the time, and we can see through. Well, I could do it at my will, but I just don't do that. I had a lot of psychic experiences. I just don't practice it. Maybe I should, but I don't. But the truth is that some phenomena exist in some dimensions, and they don't exist in others. So in our physical, emotional, and mental world, the subtle body is not there, right? Because you can't talk about it.
What are you going to be teaching tomorrow?
Tomorrow I'm going to go into the points of transcendence, and I'm going to go back to how the Kundalini rising started for me, about the emotion, about the aspect of emotional content. I'm going to start with the need to train the lower chakras and the need to cultivate the upper ones, because this is the thing that we all need. In life, we live with those two. This one too, if we say of the physical body, so there is a lot of healing going on all the time. These these three, they need to be trained. So yoga is training mostly the first one, but also all the upper ones. But anything that has to do with body is physical. Anything that has to do with emotion is of another nature. So we have to work on all these chakras separately, and this is how I teach. I teach to separate the dimensions so we can focus on one and work on one. But they help each other. So like when I was stepping out of my emotion that was so bad, the depression that I felt, I was making a mental decision and trying to guard myself from it to come and getting me again, and I was focusing on breathing. So these three, they do cooperate, but we have to separate them initially so we know what is what. So this is going to be a kind of a basic class tomorrow about knowing of each, how to see in yourself the emotional dimension, the mental dimension, how they correlate, and the truth, know the truth that you are neither of them, that your consciousness, the kundalini energy, doesn't need any of it. You're eternal. Without your emotions and without that mind and without all this other stuff, you're still there, complete. These dimensions are there, the chakras are there, so we can perceive. They're dimensions of perception. So we can perceive our life and enjoy it and experience it. So, yeah.
It's interesting you're an artist. I have an experience where you're in that beautiful flow state of creation.
Yeah.
You feel that energy. That's rather nice. I would imagine it stays at a lower spot. Can you talk about creativity, and is creativity a door to the upper chakra?
Yeah, very good, yes. This is what I noticed, and although in a conventional historical way, we understand the second chakra is sexual and creative and emotional, I saw it as purely emotional. But the nature of our kundalini energy, which is the individual unit of consciousness, is not just some energy besides other energies. That's all there is. All that we are the kundalini energy that perceives through those dimensions. And it is survival, sexual, and creative. So when it exists in the lower chakras, as it is normally, asleep at the bottom of the spine, it activates itself more through survival and sexual activity, and then it goes up to, the higher it goes through the more creative stages. So to me, accordingly to my understanding, music, sound, music, dance, things that have to do with connection and the way the music touches us, that's all the fifth chakra. That's art of the fifth chakra. The sixth chakra is more visual arts and understanding of visual arts. So yes, the upper chakras, in my understanding, are where the incredible sensation of creativity happens, and inspiration comes from all the way up.
So that creative rush is actually the movement of the kundalini.
Yeah, it could be, but you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could be opening of the upper chakras too. Sometimes we can have an experience which suddenly blows the chakra open, and that chakra possesses all that information that is, you know, it's all given to us, because it's a mechanical thing with the subtle body. If there are blockages here, if the second and third chakra is congested, it needs something to get it through. Sometimes the kundalini energy can bypass the knots, the chakras itself, if they're congested, and go and maybe help open the other ones. But mostly it's just something makes us connects, and the upper chakra opens up, the sixth chakra opens up, the fifth chakra opens up, or the fourth chakra opens up, and we feel love, right? And we feel in that good space of trusting and being benevolent. Yes.
So you are saying that chakras can open up without kundalini rising as well?
Yes. Yes.
Chakras can open up with what?
Excuse me?
Chakras can open up without kundalini rising through it too.
Oh,
Yes. They can through external stimulation of kinds. You know, for example, we go to a concert and we suddenly just feel so great because of the music we hear. You know, the kundalini can be active with that, but it doesn't have to be. It's the chakra itself that is developing. And that's why what I'm teaching developing of the upper chakras and training the lower ones. And once we have that, it's not a problem to trigger kundalini to go up. You see, people are trying to get the kundalini to go up, but it's not the first thing to do. The first thing to do is to get those emotions out of the way. And not in the sense of pushing them away, but resolve them. Through the meditation of emptiness, this is what happens. That chakra clears up, and the kundalini will go up by itself. You don't have to push kundalini to go up, because kundalini itself wants to go up. That's its natural desire. This is our natural desire to go up, to unite. The Atman unites with.
So when you talk about the kundalini, are you talking about the soul?
The what?
You know, the kundalini, I say you want it naturally wants to rise.
Yes.
So it's in the lower chakra, right?
It is at the bottom of the spine.
And what is
In the
relationship-
sacrum.
Okay, yeah, fine.
In the sacrum area. And as long as we are living under the influence of kundalini in that area, we will be dominated by the first three chakras, by the material, emotional, and mental. And that's what ego is. It's not like ego is the bad thing, something. It's simply domination of the first three chakras. We put more focus on that, and the upper ones are very often not developed enough, so they could actually make us go, wow, you don't need to worry about that, you are loved, right? So
what's the connection between soul and kundalini then?
soul and kundalini? Well, kundalini is the individual unit of consciousness which exists all the time. It enters, or it is in our body, it is at the bottom of the spine, and it is you as you are. The soul is something that becomes realized, self-realized, in the sixth dimension. So the soul possesses all of the knowledge of all of these dimensions up to the seventh, excluding the seventh. But the kundalini itself, although it has all the potential, as long as it's asleep at the bottom of the spine, it does not yet realize itself as a soul. But it's the same thing. See?
Yes, that's right, I agree.
Okay.
Okay, no, we're on the same page. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to.
It's the consciousness,
Yes.
but
Yeah,
we have consciousness here, and we have consciousness here. Yeah.
I just wanted to hear you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there is a whole process of getting there. Yeah. Okay.
So are these kundalini experiences different for different people as it rises?
Kundalini nature is different individually to a degree where some of us have stronger kundalini, some of us have weaker kundalinis. You know, sometimes it goes up really fast, and that's what happens with a lot of very often with people who experience the whole kundalini rising. They know it's like, if you've read Eckhart Tolle, it's called, I call him Tolle because in Europe that's how you pronounce it. He describes the moment of the third chakra and the discussion he has with his mind, right? And then he says, well, something happened and then suddenly everything was beautiful. So there is no description of particular of the whole process of going from the third all the way to the seventh chakra, because it happens fast. It can be so powerful. It's a tremendous energy, so it can just break through, and you don't know what happened. You're there, and that's good enough.
The other question I have is what do you do with that? If you have that kind of experience, like, is there a way to harness that, train that? How is it something you can use for good, or is it just an experience to show you what the reality of the universe is?
Yeah, it's an experience that you can do with whatever you want, because you're free to do whatever you want. What usually happens is that if someone experiences it, eventually there comes a time when you feel that you have to give it, when you feel that you have to share it, and because it's helpful. So that's when eventually the energy itself, instead of sitting in the lower, the sacrum, and eventually it has the freedom to move up and down, and it stays more in your heart more and more often, and then you know that the way to live on is to share that experience, to help others to realize themselves. And other than that, there is a lot of your personal life changes, but it doesn't mean that it changes to people from the outside. You know, they look just like everyone else, and there is no difference. But your life is different because, not because you're constantly up there in nirvana, but because you had, and that's where Ramana Maharshi is such important spiritual teachers, because he coined that self-inquiry. The self-inquiry is something that allows you to know what happens all the way through, and you know that that's who you are, that state is possible for everyone, regardless of anything. Anyone can be there.
Thank you. One last question. When you're in that seventh dimension, are you unaware of your
completely aware of everything.
Aware of everything.
Aware of everything completely. There is no question unanswered by then. You completely know. You know exactly what happened. What happened? You know everything. You know the whole path. And even if you don't have words for it, I had no words because I didn't know those words. I never even thought that that was a possibility. I didn't know about it. Honestly, I didn't believe in it. So, even without knowing the words, you know. So, is there anything else? Yes?
So where the kundalini resides pretty much dictates the construct of that reality. Right?
Exactly, yes. We are the it's the consciousness. If it's there, it's there. Yeah, and if it moves up sometimes, then suddenly, wow, you're in love, you know.
But other realms of reality probably have their kundalini centered in a different place, which would give a different experience of that.
Could you repeat that, please?
So if the kundalini is resident not at a lower chakra, but a higher chakra,
Yeah.
from a reality standpoint, that would dictate the characteristics of that reality.
Of course, exactly.
And have you had experience with other realms where the kundalini is at a different height?
Well, as I described the experience as it was happening, so at each point there was going through specific dimension, that was the nature of that dimension. So when it was moving through the third chakra, I experienced that thing with my mind following each of my thoughts. The mind does it by itself, and having those thoughts come up to the present time. So, in other words, if you have your kundalini at that time in the third chakra, you can depending on the state of the chakra itself, depending how congested it is, what it is congested with, what's the nature of your thoughts, what are the structures of your thoughts, because it's all there. Depending on that, you'll be living in that world. Okay, so people who are, very mental people who have strong minds, big businessmen or something, they're in their mind, they're in the third chakra, they're just thinking, it's always purpose oriented, so it's goal oriented. If you are in the fourth chakra, then you're giving, you're loving, and you feel that love. You may hurt if you're not connected with other chakras, because you may feel like you're being abused, right? Because your heart is open and you don't feel the love being given back to you, but you know it's there. It's a dimension, yes. The consciousness perceives through these different dimensions. Are we done? Sorry, guys. I hope you come tomorrow and we can continue.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And tomorrow is from 7 till 9.
Monique's book is available at the front desk, and you use a $2 off coupon. You get savings on that, and Monique will sign your books.
That's right. I'm going to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Of course, here, June.
Month of June.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.